Hello, my name's Tim. I'm here today with Nicky Snazell from the Pain Relief Clinic. We're talking a bit about your business, which is so inspiring. I've sort of experienced that part myself, but also about your book, which is great to hear. Now, with the book that you've just written, there's a great intro line that you put in there that you often feel like you're in the illness industry and not the wellness industry. And I wonder if you could just enlighten me in terms of what you mean about this and how your goal is to remedy the wellness within people.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
One of the really important things is going back in the ancient times, the ancient shamans would look after people, and they'd only get paid if someone was well.
Wow.
Because the responsibility was, we're going to look after you, we're going to keep you well. They would look at, and hence the book, The 4 Keys to Health, they would look at the dwelling.
Great idea.
You know, was your shelter, was your cave dry, or was it in a windy position? Did you have predators? Were you stressed? They would look at your movement, the second key. They would look at, are you physically doing too much or too little? Is your water, is it clean? Is it from a clean source? Are your crops growing in nutrient-rich soil? They would consider all these factors when they were interviewing their client that they were going to keep well. And then when illness hit, they wouldn't get paid, because their client would say, well, you haven't served me, you haven't looked after me, you failed me. Whereas if we flip that over and we think, what do we have now? 5 or 10 minutes with our general practitioner who will quickly do the best he can in that tiny time frame and administer a drug. It's very, very different. So you really are literally, when a patient comes to see me, he's used to being in that situation where he's already broken, he's already in pain, and I'm simply the firefighter with the hose on full, just pouring water over the wreckage. So the book really is, if we could go back in time, rather than treating the symptoms and the suffering right at the end of it, like now I'm putting the fire out on your house, what if we could take it back and actually get to the point where you had the knowledge that your house would never burst into flames. You knew how to prevent it.
So I guess we're part of this, and it's impressive that you've treated over 8,000 patients in your clinic, and I've spoke to some of them, and I guess their testimonials are a real tribute to your approach. But I guess what you just said, and it's very relevant, what you are doing is really going to the source of the issues of pain. Although your business is about pain relief, and you are there to solve those issues of immediate pain relief, the bigger picture is that there's more issues relating to people understanding their wellness. And I think I'll be right in saying that maybe the book is there to provide people with an insight into how to get to understand that about themselves. Would that be a right sort of analogy to it?
Yes, I often find if you have someone in front of you and they come to you, they're often very angry and very frightened, because they'll come maybe at a time when they haven't looked after themselves, they're working all hours, they're not eating properly, not because they're particularly thoughtless, they just don't have an understanding about what they should eat and what's good for them, and they're looking after everybody else. Maybe they're very busy mothers or fathers, or looking after their family, they're busy at work, and they've come and they're broken. So the last thing you can do then is say, well, you need to be 4 stone lighter and you need to do more exercise, and you just give them overload. So they get angry. When on earth am I going to find more time to exercise? And how do I lose weight? Whereas if you give someone the tools first, there's no anger, because they know how to address it first. And then you say, let me help you, let me guide you.
That's a good point, because, only this week, the NHS, and I know their chief exec has announced a series of plans of reforms, who states that the main public approach should be more focused on self-help rather than prevention, which is, I guess, exactly what you've just echoed, and not relying on others for the cure, which people tend to do. They divorce themselves of their own responsibility. But you know what, it was really interesting this week when they analysed, because it's very topical, the expenditure of the NHS, £51 billion, some ridiculous figure, on prescription drugs. And number 2, in terms of top prescription drugs behind statins, was pain relief. So all of that, I guess, is sort of echoing what you're saying. But maybe your challenge is, because this is a big leviathan, to be able to turn round public opinion from seeing it just as a immediate pain relief cure to taking on board that responsibility for themselves to seek wellness in a different way, is maybe what you're trying to portray in the contents of the book.
Exactly, because historically, you have a problem and you take a tablet. Well, a tablet won't address your stress, your mental problems, the lack of nutrition in your body. Painkiller is quite toxic.
You've obviously got a natural enthusiasm and ability, let's call it creating wellness in people, has to deal with the simple fact, as I've already said, that we must take more responsibility for ourselves. Yet bizarrely, we seem that others are more responsible for it than ourselves. And I guess really what I'm trying to find out is how your approach can make a difference, because that is a hell of a challenge to try and undertake, is to try and make that change within people.
I think it's having the time and the interest and listening to people and unraveling like a ball of wool, unraveling that one thread as to why someone is suffering, because pain and suffering is completely two different beasties. Someone may come to me and have a bad back, and then through the conversation mention that they've just lost their partner, and the grief is so intense they can't and they don't know how to handle it. So the brain has all these tricks in its box that it will change that pain, and the posh word is somatize it. So it changes it into a physical condition. So that emotional impact, my God, I've lost the love of my life, how do I cope? Becomes back pain sometimes, or neck pain, or starts cancer, because the brain doesn't want to deal with the emotional pain. So if you don't take out those threads, if you don't work out where the pain started, you might prescribe a nice muscle relaxant, and let's have some tramadol and paracetamol for your pain, and let's give you an anti-inflammatory for inflammation. But your body's actually screaming out for help. And if you're not listening to why it started, then it's a disaster.
So it's almost like people can, where they get embroiled in an emotional tangle through whatever life events can occur, that can be the real start point, catalyst point, that then creates further problems.
I had a guy who drove, he was trying to avoid a family of, there were a lot of children in the car, wasn't his fault, they had gone across the road, he actually remembers making that decision to drive into a wall to save the family. But as he drove into the wall, he smashed his legs and his pelvis. There was a lot of anger because he was in pain. So when he came to see me, and he'd been to everybody and they were addressing the physical pain, nobody had actually thought about the mental pain, and he'd actually changed his personality at the shock of impact. It was so huge that his brain had said, you chose to do this to your body, that he changed his personality and his memory overnight, and he became someone different. So not only did I use the lasers and the needles and this special technology to regrow bone cells, but we used a kind of trance and a kind of NLP technique to actually introduce him back to his true self. So we got out photo albums of his old life and his photographs and what he used to do and who he was, and he started to become him, and then he had the potential to heal, because he was locked into a new personality of someone who was angry and someone who just hung on to the pain. The mind is quite complicated.
I guess in some way this is where maybe the NHS themselves, although, and you've told me before, a lot of people come to you for pain relief and believe some of it should be on the NHS, but it's not, that this is really dealing with that aspect of people having to deal with themselves. And I think your practice really, from my understanding, has been developed and created really by the relentless desire to try and help people feel better. But people really are unaware of that emotional tangle that can exist. That story you've just said, I think, really typifies that. And that's really special, really unique. Explain to me on how you got involved and why you got involved in the industry. You've obviously got that natural passion, enthusiasm behind it, but what is behind the eyes of Nicky Snazell on this one?
I think it's quite a convoluted tale, really, because since I was little, I have a little intuitive gift about sensing when people are in pain, when they're in trouble, and I've always been fascinated by healing since I was very small. And then in my teenage years, my mother had a very, very nasty, severe back problem. So that had really two sides. One was that I was sort of suddenly drawn into something where I saw someone suffering tremendously and looked to sort of what did the NHS, what were they able to prescribe, what could they do, and sort of go to all these different practitioners with my mother and see all the pain and the suffering and also the worry on their faces as to how they fixed it or how could they fix it. And in those days they didn't and they couldn't. So on one hand, I then became drawn into that side. That's interesting. How could I help? On the other side, I really, for a while, got quite kind of upset by being near suffering, being near pain. I then went to study biology and spent a lot of time, strangely enough, at the QE in the library, studying cells, studying how they functioned as a biologist. And then in my final year while I was doing that, I had an injury and I ended up in a physiotherapy unit. And I thought, wow, I can marry up time with patients. I can use the biology degree, and I went on to take a physiotherapy degree. I can study lots of other different medical aspects of things, and I could marry in the psychology with how the cells function and how very specific treatments could actually sort someone out. So long story short, that really started this journey of how do we fix people? How do we switch pain off? How does someone get to the point, like my mother, where she was suffering tremendously for years? How did that happen? How do we break it down? How do we fix it?
A great little phrase that I read in the book, and it sort of, I think, encapsulates a lot what you said about people's memories of fear, which is relevant to the story you've just told me about that gentleman. And it's not what many people have naturally become accustomed to when dealing with their own health. And I guess what I'm trying to say there is that questioning. I naturally, if I have a pain, will go to the cupboard and get some pain relief to get to the process of which you are trying to do. And I get that link. Your personal conquest to try and get people to understand a little bit more about themselves is being carried very much by you, your own personal enthusiasm and personality. But to try and inject that into others, you've got a great team around you here at the Pain Relief Clinic. But how do you see to try and change that within people? Is the book going to be part of that process, do you think?
Very much so. The book and the second book I'm working on, radio, I'm really keen to get to do more radio work, because that's a really lovely way to get the community to work more closely together. My brother's worked in radio all his life, and he felt very passionate about getting the community involved in helping each other. And I think the most important thing, especially with the practice here, is that with about nearly 9,000 patients, so many of them now help each other. We had a lovely thing at Christmas where I said for the 12 days of Christmas, I wanted to give 12 people the gift of coming in and having some healing. So I need you out there to actually suggest somebody else, somebody in the street that's done a lot of special work for someone, or someone that's going to have a miserable Christmas. And we got the most beautiful letters through from our patients who weren't thinking about themselves, they were thinking about somebody else, and they got it. It was like, this person has got cancer and they're scared, and I know that they're being brave for the family, or this person has got arthritis, but they never mention it because they're looking after so-and-so. And that's the way that you really start spreading the word, by leading by example and also explaining to people about what it is, getting them enthusiastic. A little trick is when you're talking to someone is actually get them just to place their hand on their heart when they speak to you, because as we talked about wisdom of the felt sense, when you actually place your hand on your heart and you speak from the heart, that is often when you really connect with someone and they really get it. And I think really with pain and with everything, it's like, cut to the chase. What are we really dealing with? What's really going on? And just complete honesty.
It's an interesting aspect when you talk about the 4 keys of health. It's great to talk about these philosophy, the neuroscience behind it, but I think that is a great way of trying to put it across, as you have done in the book, with mindset, nutrition and hydration, fitness and lifestyle. Can you expand on these in terms of what they mean for our well-being?
Of course, so if you imagine the whole idea was with the book that you've got your 4 keys practically in your head. And what I've done with the book is there's questionnaires at the beginning and the end of every chapter. And they're color-coded red, which means if you go to see your doctor today, the chances of you recovering from that illness is not really very good. Amber and green. And the tools are within each chapter to enable you to turn your red, amber to green. So each chapter represents one of the 4 keys. So the first key that we come to in the book is the mindset. So when you wake up in the morning, you're thinking about, how do I feel today? So getting up in the morning and having something that you can feel grateful for. It sounds crazy, but you already hardwire your mindset. You get up in the morning and you think of maybe 3 things before you clean your teeth that you're grateful for. Science says, neuroscience says, if you're grateful, you can't be fearful. You cannot feel gratitude and fear at the same time.
Good point.
Fear wires you up for not healing, for not digesting, for not being in a good place. So just 3 things quickly in the morning that you're grateful for. That sets you up in a good place. And it's very important with mindset that you're just peaceful several times a day. Connect with your heart and think about something that you're grateful for, that you're pleased about, to reset where you're at. Mind is incredibly important. Your mind decides your life. You and I can decide how today is going to run. We can decide how next year is, and we can decide how our life is, but you have to write it down, have to script your life plan. So many people drive their head like they drive the car in a kind of subconscious stupor, and then wonder why their life's a mess. So the first and most important key is the mind. Second key that's very important indeed, is what do we do with what we eat and drink? What do we do with that? You know, are we putting the right stuff in our body? And when we eat, are we really screwed up and angry and stressed as we're eating? Or are we saying to our body, now this food's going to go inside, it's really good for us, I'm feeling loved, I'm feeling happy, these nutrients are going to really give me the body I want. There's some simple stuff in the book, some simple recipes. It's what I do with my life. It's easy to follow. It's not scary. Because the important thing with diet is you don't take away people's pleasure. We are all so busy and so stressed. If you say to someone, gonna diet, that's scary. You don't need to. You can eat your yummy stuff that you love, but once the things that are missing from your diet, once the deficiencies are out there, once they've stopped because you've had some good nutrients, you don't crave the bad stuff. So I remember the first time that I sat with a nutritionist, I was kind of a bit anti because I was a little, she's going to tell me, you know, not to have my little bits of nice, yummy dark chocolate and my nice drinks that I love. No, she said, well, if you put the nutrients in your body that your body craves, you don't crave the bad stuff. And it's so true. If I mix up a lovely juicer, a fresh, healthy juicer, I'll maybe have a couple of pieces of dark chocolate, but I don't want any more because I'm not craving certain things, because my cells have got the nutrients I need. So it's all these fad diets are a complete waste of time. They're stressing people out. They make them feel unhappy. There's no need to. All you do is you put the nice nutrients in. You love yourself more. Third key is fitness. People often saying to me, what suits me? What should I do? Yoga? Tai Chi? Should I exercise? What should I do? My life is so busy. So I simply walk you through what I do. So in my office when I'm busy, I sit on a fit ball for my postural work. I've got some weights on the floor. So if I've got 5 minutes, I can do a few weights. I'll put some trainers on. I'll just run around the garden, run down the road. There's little bits you can do. If you've got time to switch the TV on, if you've got time to sleep, you can exercise. But it's knowing how to. And the Eastern exercise is lovely because it actually connects you with your spirit and your soul. So you heal as you move. And we don't really do that in the West. No. So you sit there quietly in the evening, you put a few minutes aside, and you simply do a few stretches where you check your body. You actually go through your body with your heart, with your mind, and you see how you feel. And these little clues make a difference, and you can click you straight into a green. So you're holding 3 green keys already. So your fourth one, the important one, is your lifestyle. And there's a lovely little exercise you can do with your partner where you sit down and you do a timetable and you say, okay, if I was to write out my timetable, how do I feel about certain things in my life? And you might write down, I'm driving to work for 2 hours, you know, and you write down an emotion and your partner writes down the emotion they think you're feeling when you're driving to work for 2 hours. And then you go through your day and you think, what am I really doing with my life? And it's amazing how you can tweak things. Okay, so say that the moment you have to drive 2 hours to work. But what if you play the most amazing, interesting bit of research or a book or something in the car while you're driving?
Oh, that's interesting.
So you change your life with what you've got. So you then go back and you emotionally score that experience. Okay, bad drive, but wow, I listened to the most incredible book. I felt alive. I used that time wisely.
Almost like a payoff.
Yes, something that you layer. And then you go in and you say, well, I hate my office because it's dark and it's boring and the energy's not right. So you go buy some flowers and you buy some plants and you change the lighting. Same 4 walls, but you've changed your life. So there's all those kind of things in the lifestyle. So you get another green key. You're holding 4 green keys. That means you're going to live longer. Very unlikely are you going to suffer. If you get a cold or a flu or cancer, you're probably going to kill it. You're going to nail it. Because the fascinating thing is with your life is that fear is learned. The only fear that we're born with is when we're a little baby and, you know, we don't want to fall out of trees and we don't want to fall off something. We're born with fear of falling. But everything else is learned. And when we're an embryo in the mother's stomach, they actually can tell the cells responding to the mother's response to her life, the mother's kind of felt sense of what's happening around her. So you're already born with fears that aren't yours. And then we add to them. They looked at a family where the great-grandma and the grandma and the mother had tremendous fears of snakes because where they lived, there were a lot of poisonous snakes around. And guess what? You know, the baby fears a snake, no surprise. But the fascinating thing was through the generations that genetically there was some kind of hard wiring, something going on with the brain that when even the word snake was mentioned, they could actually measure a huge cascade of biochemical phenomena going on within the body, and they could see a huge surge in the white cell count. So they would take some blood from the child that was freaking out because the mother had said, snake! And they would take a blood sample and they would see there was this huge amount of white cells being made. Simply the immune system had responded to a learned fear, which would then mean that if you had that learned response of fear going on all day long, or your chance of healing from arthritis or cancer is second to none. It's not going to happen. Fear, learned fear is fascinating because what you have to do with that is you have to cut it off. You have to literally stop it. And neurolinguistic programming can do that. It literally stops it dead there and then.
I think it's really interesting what you've done here because I think it's very easy for people to paint a picture and to say, as the NHS have done, let's look at issues which you've talked about in terms of obesity. You know, their statement, eat less, move more, very factual, but there's not much more behind it in terms of, yes, I know, and I can talk from personal experience because I've lost, as you know, I've lost 5 stone. And on conversations that we've had, I can now understand that connection in terms of getting to know me as a person and what my triggers are to make me feel better. And I really get and understand that to do that, you've almost got to package what you do, to quantify the elements of what you do, because people need to, forgive the pun, digest it easily. You can come out with a lot of statements about the philosophy side of it, the neuroscience side of it, but people might not be able to tangibly grab some of those. I think what you've done with the 4 keys, I think what you've done with the book is a great way for people to be able to digest what you're trying to say. It's hard enough for some people to really get to know themselves, but this is like a little path. This is like that little boat on the river that's going to take me down, maybe to that next little stop, that little port, but with a greater knowledge that ultimately my well-being is really going to impact on this. And I think that's really typifies the lack of knowledge of people about their treatment options means that painkillers are still the most obvious way of dealing with pain, because that is not addressing the things that are going on behind it. Like you said, the link between the stress, the guy in the car accident, you know, that then created further pain. His treatment on the NHS would have been very specific to that pain, not to his emotional pain. And I really do start to understand, and I hope people out there do now, in terms of where those are inextricably linked. And I guess the challenge for people is to understand themselves. But you know what? I don't think that's any bad thing. You know, it's no bad thing if they want that end goal to feel better. Easy to say to people, eat less, move more. But this is a great way, I think, of people to try and understand more about themselves. And I commend you on that. You know, there are so many other options available to people. And Nicky, I believe you are the conduit and the catalyst for this change and the wellness quest. I wish you well with the book. And I hope people can experience it more in terms of understanding that link between pain and wellness, and hope you become their key for experiencing a little bit more on that wisdom with the felt sense. So, Nicky, thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tim, and it's lovely to see you slimmer and happier and healthier and the special person that you are.
Great, thank you. Take care.